I read 90 standalones. Those are 17 more since last year, and since then, 4 has been stripped from their position. There are 6 new additions, 3 that increase the position, and there are 2 that remain the same. And throughout these years, what I learned is that some books were bad. The majority were actually pretty good, but there are 10 that absolutely blew my mind. Well, actually 15, if we take into consideration the honorable mentions. First honorable mention, we have a standalone that decreased 2 positions. This was previously a top 9, and now I just consider it in the honorable mentions, perhaps because as it has settled down, I've read more stuff, and at the same time I feel that this is still very impactful and it is top tier, but the mark that it has created in me, it's not as strong. And we have a standalone from one of the most popular female authors that we have right now. She is absolutely killing it, and this story, it's all about rage, about prejudices, about colonialism, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This story, it's aimed for those of you that love character-driven stories. It's fairly slow because we will mainly be following the perspective of one of these 4 main characters, and we will be following him since he is a child. It's not autobiographic, but it is very slow. You get to see how he is, how he reflects, and the story overall, although it has a rich magic system in itself, it's not something that really shines in the book. It's something that you read. It has tons of footnotes that make you illustrate the power of language, because in here, language is the key part of the magic. And what we have, it's a story that talks about colonialism, sexism. It's full of hard topics, and the pacing on itself is slow at the beginning, and the ending, it's very intense. It's one of those reads that if you start it, you won't be able to stop thinking about what is happening. You want to keep moving forward, but in terms of pacing, it's not super balanced. Second honorable mention, we have one that it was also honorable mention last year, and I just still love this author. She has this writing style that it is beautiful, but it is not overly flowery. And even if you're reading an extremely character-driven story where we will be following our first witch, what you see are incredible adventures, non-stop moments in which you're rooting for a character, and that is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is the same author as the Song of Achilles. But Circe has a special space in my heart because not only I'm a sucker for Greek mythology, and if you love that, you will see different appearances here. You will see Odysseus, the Minotaur, and it is a story that it's very adventurous. We will be following Circe since she is a child, and it is very autobiographic in that sense, but still you get to see how she is mistreated and her passion and her greatness, and it is a story that utterly compelled me. It brought tears to my eyes, and I absolutely love it and recommend it to a lot of you. Honorable mention 3, a new addition to this list that actually I read a couple of years ago, but after talking about it with some friends not so while ago and reading, and perhaps in the moment in which we are currently in society, I feel this is a very important story. It manages to pack an emotional punch that is incredible, and it is not really a very long book. The magic system, it's well crafted, it's a hard magic system, but the main thing, it's the anger, the ambition of our characters. I loved the idea of having a main character that it is, ambitious, that she wants to change things and she wants to do whatever it takes in order to get what she wants. She is not super likable, but I adored her, and that is Blood of a Bright Haven by Emil Wang. In my mind, the writing style of this one relates very much with R.F. Kuang because it has this anger. When you're reading it, you are not transported to a state of calm in which you are fantastic. No, things are happening within you. It's not wonder if you cry with it or if you feel rage. We will be following the first woman in order to become a mage in this society and the different alliances and situations that she needs to face. It's a story that revolves around magic, corruption, injustices. I loved it, and it's probably a story that you won't forget either. Honorable mention number 4, we have a story that actually dropped a lot of positions. Last year, it was on my top 5, and this year is an honorable mention, not because I don't love it, but because the new additions to this list actually made this book being pushed down a little bit, although I still love this character and this story with all my heart, and probably it's the shortest and most impactful story that I read in my life, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. The main idea here is that we will be following Piranesi as he discovers the magic that revolves around his house, which is as big as the world. He does not know what he is there, he's almost alone, there's only only this other person called the Other that comes every now and then to help him figure out what is happening, and things are weird. But how Piranesi describes his life, how he approaches to every day with this scientific curiosity, this view, how he documents everything, because that's how you read this, that was fantastic. And I was compelled to see what was happening. It's very low on magic, so it's a little bit of a thriller kind of magical realism story. It's one of my favorites of all time. So just bear in mind like how I love all of these stories, but this one, I assure you, although it's not for everyone perhaps because it's kind of a weird read, it's one of those that will warm you inside at the same time that will enrage you, because you see what happens and you're like, no, but why? It's a phenomenal book, and it is very short, although it's the kind of book that you want to savor. And last in the honorable mentions, we have a new edition here, and it's a story that, again, it's very weird. It leans more towards the sci-fi spectrum, and I absolutely loved it the second time that I read it. The first time, I hated it, DNF'd it, and I was like, I don't understand where is the hype, why people actually read this. And this is How You Lose a Time War. This is a love song to time travel, to love stories, to love letters, and to weird characters having compelling and yet very different perspectives. It's a story that asks a lot of you because you don't know really what is happening. You see stories going back and forth, the perspectives change, and you see everything mainly through letters that these characters are writing one to another. They are in opposite side of this war, and this war it revolves around managing time. So it's an incredibly enticing premise that, in my opinion, landed perfectly. You need to read, and until you're finishing the book, you don't really understand properly what is happening. But it's the kind of story that after you read it, you're like, oh, wow, what? I loved it, although you definitely need to be in the mindset of reading something that is bizarre, that it is beautiful, but it asks a lot of you. That is the kind of read. In position number 10, and we go to the proper 10 books that blew my mind, and I consider all of these favorites. We have one of Sanderson's secret projects, and hey, let's be honest, most of the secret projects were great, at least 2 were fantastic. And this one for me was so important because not only do I love the premise and the world building, I thought was fascinating, and I was instantly transported to this beautiful place, but the premise, how we have nightmares around and one of our characters need to paint them in order to strip them from their power. It's something that I love. It's kind of like dreams and nightmares and the power that we can hold for them. It's something that I absolutely love, and this I consumed in just one day, and it is Jumi and the Nightmare Painter. I love this. This was secret project number 3. It was released the 1st of July. I read it the 1st of July and I was in awe. It's not only a very sweet story, but it manages to have this beautiful pacing. It's addictive, it's character driven, but at the same time, we move pretty fast. And we have this Freaky Friday kind of story in which our 2 main characters change and you need to relearn their magic and their world, and the world building is different. In one of these worlds, we have complete darkness, and there's just these 2 different color lines that are illuminating everything. And in the other, we have this very beautiful world that reminded me a little bit to Middle Earth in a sense, in which our main character does magic, but it's a way of meditation. So it was such an incredible blend. The illustrations are also great. Honestly, the only fault for me in this book and why it is not higher in position, because this one actually dropped 6 positions since last year. It was in top 4 and now it's in the top 10. It's because perhaps of the romance. It was incredibly sweet, very young, but it perhaps is not to my taste necessarily, or although I was really compelled and really moved by how beautiful this was, I was not super kind of like interest, and now I realize that. Position number 9, we have a new addition here that it's incredible. I loved it beginning to end. Not only the book is fantastic, the narration it's incredible, Andy Serkis, the actor of Gollum, it's the one that does it, and he does an incredible job. It's a story about adventure, a quest at its best, and that is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Since I read this book, instantaneously page 1, I was happy. It's a happy story that reminds you of being a child, of being adventurous, of having the joy of living, and you see riddles, you see dragons, you see everything. I think this story, it's perfect. The interactions that our character has with the dwarves, with Gollum, with the dragon, it's incredible. I was laughing out loud. I was surprised. I was curious whenever these riddles were happening, and I consumed this so fast and I loved it so much. I really regretted not reading this before. I know in essence, in theory, it's leans more towards the younger audience. But hey, I'm 35. I just read it last year and I loved it nonetheless. So if you haven't picked this one up, do so. It's short, but it is very impactful and it's one of my favorites of all time. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Position number 8, we have a story that it's considered a standalone, but it's definitely part of a series, although the story begins and ends, and it's at the same time part of a big, massive world from our very best Sir Terry Pratchett, and that is Guards. The beautiful part of this story is how much you laugh while reading it, but how you are amazed on how incredible the writing style is because you reflect, and it's this perfect balance. There's humor, but there's a lot of also criticism, and in this one we start with the guards, we have with wizards, there's also dragons. The characters are phenomenal. I was not able to put it down. One of the main characters here is also absolutely a cinnamon roll, and I still feel for these characters. I want to continue with the Guard series, and honestly the humor in here was fantastic. I started this on audio and I very quickly went to the physical version of it because there are some lines that I just wanted to reread and you just cackle out loud. It's that book that if you are in a bad spot, you want to read it because it will definitely cheer you up. It's fantastic. It's rich. The world building, it's sometimes feels silly, but you always see the greatness of this story, and I absolutely fell head over heels with it. Due to that, this one increased 2 positions. In position number 7, we have a new edition from last year, and this is one of those books that you don't often hear, so it's pretty underrated, a hidden gem. And I reckon it's because the writing style is different, the characters are different, and it's a story that all in all it's pretty weird, but it is beautiful, and it's one of the most impactful, well-written stories that I read. I read this with a friend. We both loved it, and this is The Spear Cuts Through Water. The idea of this, or what really compelled me, is how much the fourth wall it's broken. We are within a story. We start with our grandma telling us a story, and we are transported into this magical realm of dreams, and through those dreams we kind of get into this story, and within the proper story we flow through characters in such a beautiful way. It is really easy to get lost in here. There are no proper chapters. We have 5 days and that's it. So if you are one of those that are just like one chapter and I go to bed, I'm afraid it will happen to you what happened to me, which is that I basically read this very quickly because I could not stop reading it. It's a beautiful story. We will be following these 2 characters that are basically on a quest. They have 5 days and they're chased by the most dangerous creatures on this realm. You see different type of magic, gods. It's a cataclysm. It's a story that has stakes that are incredibly high, and I love this. I promise you it's a story that you won't see coming. It's weird at some times, and I was freaked out by the end of the book by some scenes that happened, but I was like, I loved it. I felt it so deeply, and I cannot wait to read more about this author. And I beg you, if you have not taken Spear Cuts Through Water yet, please do so. In position number 6, and it has increased 5 positions since last time. Previously it was in honorable mentions, and right now I'm like, no, I actually really love this story. I keep finding myself thinking about this story, and I want to recommend it still to a lot of people, a lot of readers. So hopefully if you haven't picked this one up, you can give it a try. It's from one of these authors that I thought was my mortal enemy, because the Starless Sea, I Not that I hated it, but it was definitely not for me. I ended up being super confused. I did not understand it. But this one, it's that kind of book that makes you believe in magic. The fourth wall, it's also broken. You were invited to this circus from the beginning. And if you pick this one up, I promise you, you will be here for an incredible journey. And that is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book, it's the personification of magic, of believing in things that don't exist. And while reading it, I felt that instantaneously that I found something that was unique. It's that kind of story that from the beginning you know that it's going to become in one of your all-time favorites of all time again, because it's not only that the writing style is beautiful, but the proper idea, the descriptions are a little bit flowery, but it sparkles. I don't know how to explain it. This is one of those books that I had on my TBR for ages, and for some reason I was not really compelled to read it. Just give it 10 pages and see what happens, see if you're compelled. In essence, it has been pitched as a battle between two magicians, and that's not at all what happens. There is a lot of magic, there are two magicians that are competing, but it is not that. It's more on the life on the circus, how magic is displayed by these two magicians, how love is at its core of it all. And it's a story that screams again, read me over a hot cup of coffee and a rainy day, and just felt magical. I love this, and I will still recommend this one until I guess all of you read it. In position number 5, we have a new edition, and it was one of my favorite books of last year. I was mind blown about it. It's a sci-fi story, and I think this author did an incredible job on bringing up a story and creating it on something that I personally thought before. It's not a very common trope, but it's around dreams, about memories. What if one day you would have a memory of something that not necessarily happened? How would that change you? How would have a ripple effect on your life and those that surround you? And that is the premise of Recursion by Blake Crouch. If something needs to be said about this author, is that the pacing is non-stop. If you're on a reading slump, you need to pick this one up. It's absolutely addictive. Same thing that happens with Dark Matter. It is incredibly fast. The stakes every chapter are higher and higher and higher, and this author is not afraid to actually take one thread and take it to the last consequences. As you read it, you feel this emotion growing up on you. I was anxious, I could not stop reading, and I loved how everything turned out. I think it's a mind-blowing story that if you are as obsessed as I am about memories, about the brain, about the power of those core elements on how we are, this is going to be a fantastic read for you. In position number 4, we have a standalone that has decreased 2 positions, and this pains me, but bear in mind that I still love this very much. This is still one of my favorites of all time. I will recommend this book every time. I love it so much, and it is because it belongs to my favorite subgenre, Flintlock. It also has this incredible, very fresh new idea on how to twist very common tropes, and that is Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky, perhaps one of the most underrated authors, and I love him. Imagine Pride and Prejudice, but with our main character being thrown to war, because this is actually how the story begins. We have the structure of the book in which the first things that we know, it's kind of like the middle of the story. We see a little bit of what is happening, just enough for us to have incredible high stakes, and there you are at the beginning of the story, understanding how our character, which is highborn, is actually thrown into war, and she is fighting. It's an incredible portrait of PTSD, of the horrors of war, of brainwashing, of being in anguish, of love. There's a love triangle here in the swords, but please don't take that as a bad sign, because I think there are a lot of tropes that in this book were done phenomenally. Just the idea of how those can be twisted was so well done. It's really low on magic, but it was so powerful. I reread this last year and I continuously fell in love with it. It's one of those books again that from page 2 I knew it was going to be one of my favorites. It's one of those stories that you don't want to stop reading because of how amazing it is. So please pick this one up if you want an incredible character work with actions, with a portrait of war, with the core of romance, and I think this book is fantastic. In position number 3, we have a new edition here, and it's a chunky standalone that I recently read. So perhaps there's a little bit of recency bias here for me, but again, from the beginning, I was vibing so much with it. It's a long story, but whenever you stop reading it, you want to almost start it anew, to go back to the characters. It's a very slow read, full of footnotes. It's considered overall one of the most complex stories that you can read because it's a little bit meandering. You have a lot of back and forths. Apparently, it seems that nothing happens for the longest of times, but just the way in which this is written, it's pure magic for me, and it was pure beauty, and you were transported to this past England in which magic it's coming back alive, and I was so transported and compelled. And that is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. The main reason why Pernesi is now on the honorable mentions is because this book is just, it has to throne it, and I did not necessarily want to have the same author multiple times, but Pernesi also, like, in my heart forever. But this one I loved so much. It's just, we have these two magicians, Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell. They're very different, and how they approach magic, it's different. What happens, it's a pretty simple story, but how it develops, it has a lot of emotional strings, and it is set in the Napoleonic Wars, and it constantly have these vibes. This book follows you, and while you read this, you will feel that you are in this other world, and I did not want this to end. The narration, it's also very solid if you want to give it a try, but I just loved it. I think the footnotes were fantastic. It has this humor on it that, granted, it's not for everyone, but for me it really landed. It is an acid critic of the society back then, and how we had all of these rules and things were absolutely crazy, and I loved how all of that blended with the fairy. It had this classic sense that I absolutely loved from the beginning. In position number 2, and it has been bumped one position, and it's because I just reread it a few months back, and I realized that this is a masterpiece that all of you need to read if you haven't already. It's a sci-fi story that actually takes a trope that it's pretty common, like the blank page state. We have our character that is in space, he does not remember anything, and he needs to recover what is happening, why he is there. But that's not the main thing. It definitely plays a key role in how we understand this character, but how he behaves, how it is written. The story is not only adventurous and beautiful, but also it's uplifting. I go time and time again to this author whenever I feel down, because it has this wonderful way of coping with situations, which is through humor, which is something that I tried to do. I'm not sure if I'm that funny, but in this case, what you discover, which I don't want to spoil, it's phenomenal. This journey of saving Earth, it's incredible. It's a story that reads very fast. It has these hard sci-fi elements, but at the same time, it's pretty accessible. So I really recommend it to you, even if you are not used to read sci-fi. It's a story that I believe you will love, because at its core of it, there's a beautiful relationship between different characters that just blew my mind, absolutely. And in position number 1, and it has remained number 1, because I still believe this is one of the most powerful books that I've read, period. Not only standalone, but books. Even if you take one of those books that are great in bigger series, such as, for me, it's Oathbringer in Stormlight Archive, or even Lord of Chaos in Wheel of Time, this one was on itself so powerful and so beautiful and compelling, and it's still, to this day, if I think about it a little bit too much, I can cry. It's that type of story. It's very character driven, it's very introspective, but it has action scenes that really rival Sanderson or the best action writers. And that is my flashy book here, Sword of Kaikeyi by Emma Wang. So the same author as Blood of a Bright Haven. And if something is clear to me now, is that this author is a master puppeteer of actually managing our emotions and influencing them. Because in Blood of a Bright Haven, we have this anger, and in here we also have anger, but there's this level of sadness, of serenity, of, acceptance, that it was so powerful. It's set in this feudal Japanese setting, although it has a little bit of modern touches to it, but it is one of my favorite settings of all time, and I thought it was incredible. The magic system, it's elemental magic. In this case, we see a lot of air, a lot of ice, and I loved how our characters needed to face the situation, this war that it's coming to them, and they are the last resort in order to fight it. We will be mainly following this family, the Matsudas, and they are kind of like the ones leading it, and you will see how different members of this family need to take up a role and need to face what is happening because they cannot do otherwise. It's not a Bilbo kind of moment in which it's like, oh, I'm gonna start an adventure, I'm going on a quest today. No, they need to face this, otherwise they will die. And how they behave, how they advance, and how you get to know the characters, it's absolutely heartbreaking. There are multiple points in this story in which I cried like a baby, and although the structure of the book, it's not as straightforward as you might think, you have like multiple points in which the main part of the story it's resolved. All in all, it's a story that absolutely blew my mind, and I think it still deserves position number 1. Now let me know which are your favorite standalones of all time, and if you want to see which are the best standalones for your favorite booktubers, I will link you here a collaboration I recently did with them. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much to my Patreon for your support. All the names are in the description. If you want to connect more with me, join our book club, live reading sprints, game nights. Join us. We are a very cozy community, and I would love to invite you.